In this Warmaster video, we are going to take a look at the Dark Elves. The Dark Elves were introduced to Warmaster as a supplementary army following the release of the original rulebook. The Dark Elves are a cruel and arrogant race. They view all other races as inferior, suitable only for slavery and death. The Dark Elves only respect those amongst their own society who hold power, especially if that power has been obtained through the manipulation, betrayal, or murder of competitors. Ambitious Dark Elves may sometimes compete against each other on the battlefield, in order to add to their personal glory and also as a means of disposing of unwanted rivals. The Dark Elves are ruled by their Witch King, Malekith, who has held power for over 5,000 years. Malekith sees himself as the rightful heir to the Phoenix throne of Ulthuan, the Elven homeland. Over 3,000 years before the time of Sigmar, Malekith tried to seize power by murdering his rival and crowning himself king. However, Malekith was cursed by the Elven gods and horrifically disfigured during the ritual of coronation. Malekith's supporters then rose up in open civil war against the remaining Elven kingdoms. This period is known as the Sundering or Kin Strife. Malekith's supporters lost this war when their homeland was fractured and destroyed by the magic of the Loyalist factions. Malekith and the remnants of his armies were forced to flee Ulthuan and eventually settled far across the ocean in a land they named Nagaroth, the Land of Chill. Malekith has ruled the Dark Elves ever since, and still harbours a burning desire to take back the Elven homelands by force. The Dark Elves are a seafaring race, and the Black Arks, which are mobile floating fortresses, pose a constant threat to coastal communities the world over. The Dark Elf way of life revolves around launching raids to capture slaves, as the entire economy of the Dark Elves is based upon slave labour, allowing the Dark Elf nobility to pursue their hedonistic pursuits of sorcery, martial prowess, and sacrifice. Dark Elf armies consist of well-disciplined soldiers, and their commanders are highly experienced. The Dark Elves also employ monsters in their army, which they have captured and tortured into submission. The Elven god of murder, Cain, is venerated by the Dark Elves, and fanatical blood cultists will sometimes make an appearance in Dark Elf armies. The Dark Elf homeland of Nagaroth is harsh, cold, and cruel, much like the Dark Elves themselves. The landscape is vast and sparsely populated, with the majority of Dark Elves residing within fortified cities on the coast. Nagaroth is rich with resources, and the victims of Dark Elf slave raids are often worked to death in the many mines and slave labour camps that cover the landscape. Nagaroth lies far to the west of the Old World, separated by the Great Gulf of the Great Western Ocean. This does not stop Dark Elf raiding fleets from travelling the distance to raid the coastal settlements of Bretonnia and the Empire. The Witch King holds court from his capital at Nagarond, and his gaze is ever drawn towards the shining island of Ulthuan, which lies across the sea to the east. On the tabletop, the Dark Elf army features medium infantry units, missile infantry units, and fanatic infantry units. They have access to excellent light cavalry and devastating heavy cavalry, supported by monsters, flyers, and artillery. The Dark Elf army features 8 troop choices and 3 character choices. You must always take 1 general, and for every 1,000 points you must take 2 units of spearmen and 1 unit of crossbowmen. The remaining troop choices are restricted, such as the excellent Cold One Knights, who are a contender for the most cost-effective heavy cavalry in the game. The Dark Elf General gives you access to Command 10, the highest in the game, although this can deteriorate as the battle unfolds. The War Hydra and the Manticore monstrous mount give you access to terror, while Harpies give you a flying option. Spearmen are your compulsory infantry choice, and they have the standard profile for medium infantry, common to many armies in Warmaster. The Spearmen profile actually represents all armoured Dark Elf infantry, including Corsairs, Black Guard and Executioners. So if you want to represent a more elite unit on the battlefield, simply add a magic item to a unit of Spearmen. In combat, Dark Elf Spearmen will beat most other light infantry types, such as those found in human armies. They have a decent armour save at 5+, which means you don't have to rely on keeping them in defendable terrain. They are also one of the cheaper units in the army, so you can build large brigades of infantry if you wish. Crossbowmen are your compulsory missile infantry. Unlike most other missile infantry, they actually have an armour save, and this gives them a little bit more survivability when engaged in a ranged duel with enemy missile troops, or if you place them in close combat. The Dark Elf crossbowmen are armed with the deadly repeater crossbow, which allows you to fire twice at 15 cm range. The double shot ability can't be used to stand and shoot against charging enemies, however. So if you want to take advantage of this special ability, you have to place your crossbowmen so close to the enemy that they will be in initiative range to be charged next turn. It is a risk, but it is often worth taking that chance, as the volume of fire you will produce at half range is often enough to remove entire stands of the enemy or rout them due to drivebacks. As with all missile infantry, defendable terrain is your friend, and one tactic is to keep your crossbowmen on the wings of the army to deter enemy flank attacks. Witch Elves are your fanatic infantry and have the standard profile common to such units across many armies. You are limited to 2 units of Witch Elves per 1000 points. They have a high number of attacks but only average hits and no armour save. They are also immune to terror and cannot be driven back by shooting. The downside is that they have to use their initiative to charge and can never evade, and must always pursue enemy in combat and must always advance where possible. Witch Elves are somewhat of a glass hammer. They will cause a lot of damage on any unit they fight in combat, but will likely destroy themselves in the process. One of the best uses is to send them into dense terrain to dig out an entrenched enemy, although it is always best to provide them with some infantry support as well. You can use Witch Elf units in column formation on the flanks of your infantry brigades to deter enemy charges, as their high volume of attacks, even when flanked, is enough to stop charges in their tracks. However, because of their fragility, it is not a good idea to place characters in a unit of Witch Elves. Dark Riders are your light cavalry unit, and as such benefit for the trial rules for light cavalry from Warmaster Revolution. They have the standard light cavalry profile, but also come equipped with the repeater crossbow. And due to their mobility, Dark Riders can make full use of the half-range double shot rule. A brigade of Dark Riders sent into the enemy's flanks or rear can unleash a withering volley of fire at close range, whilst being relatively safe from countercharges. Dark Riders can also fulfill the role of backline defence to protect against enemy flyers. You are limited to taking a maximum of 3 Dark Riders per 1000 points, but in my opinion they're an excellent unit and well worth a look. Cold One Knights are arguably the best heavy cavalry in the game, and possibly the main reason why you choose to play Dark Elves. Their profile is standard for heavy cavalry in Warmaster, but due to their ferocious reptilian mounts, Cold One Knights gain an extra attack when fighting to their front in the first round of combat. This bonus applies whether the Cold Ones charge or not, and also applies if the Cold One Knights get to make an advance move. This, when combined with the General's command of 10 and the Knight's 4+ armour save, make Cold One Knights such a deadly hammer unit. Their only downside is that they can only be brigaded with other units of Cold One Knights, but this is rarely a problem. Take as many units as you can afford and watch the enemy tremble with fear. If you combine a terror-causing character with a unit of Cold One Knights, there is virtually nothing in Warmaster that can survive their charge. Harpies are your flying monster unit. They have the standard flying monster profile found in many armies in Warmaster. However, Harpies are aligned against the long edge of the base in the same manner as Infantry, and this does limit the amount of stands you can get into combat when you charge. Some good uses for Harpies will be to attack enemy artillery pieces, to land behind enemy lines and impose the -1 command penalty, and to fly behind a combat where you have charged that turn to ensure the enemy are destroyed when they retreat. Harpies are vulnerable to being attacked by enemy flyers, however, so watch out for them. The Hydra is an interesting monster choice for the army. It is a single stand monster that causes terror, has 8 attacks on the charge and 8 attacks when charged due to its fiery breath. It can't be brigaded with other units, but it does regenerate 1 hit at the end of each combat round. It has a very good armor save at 4+, so you can use it to babysit your infantry lines to deter enemy cavalry charges. Just remember to give it a separate order. Hydras don't work well if sent off alone to charge the enemy lines, but they do work well as a counter-strike monster, especially if you can get a flank charge against enemy infantry or cavalry that has just bounced off your main line. The Boltthora is your artillery choice and provides some longer ranged firepower, although it does not reduce enemy armor saves. Each unit comprises 2 artillery pieces, and between them they can make 6 attacks at any enemy within 40 centimeters. Like all artillery, the Boltthroras are very vulnerable to enemy melee attacks, and will be a prime target for any enemy flyers. Their slow move of 10 centimeters will also tie you to a defensive playstyle if you include them. They do provide you with some area threat projection. However, if the enemy has access to any mobile troops, your artillery will require babysitting by your infantry. The Dark Elf General is one of the best in the game, with the highest possible command value of 10. You can rely upon your general to give your brigades 2 or even 3 consecutive orders, which gives you an enormous tactical advantage as you will get to pick and choose where you charge. The best use for your general is to put your Cold One Knights where they will do the most damage. The Dark Elf General is competitively priced at only 155 points, and this is because he has a negative trait. If you roll a double 6 when making an order with your general, your command value is permanently reduced by 1, and this can happen up to twice during the game. In addition, if any of your heroes or wizards roll a blunder when issuing an order, you must choose to either reduce your general's command by 1 point, or execute the character that blundered, removing them from play. And this rule nicely represents the treacherous and self-serving nature of the Dark Elf nobility. On average, this special rule will come into effect at least once per game, so it is well worth investing in the Scepter of Sovereignty. For only 30 points, this magic item allows your general to ignore 1 blunder rolled per game. The Dark Elf hero is standard. With a command of 8, he can be used to order your less crucial brigades, and due to the possibility of him being executed during the game, you might want to invest in more than 1. Heroes are also a good option to be given a special mount. They can choose from the Manticore, which is a flying terror-causing monster which adds 2 attacks in combat, or a more cost-effective version is the Cold One Chariot, which adds a single attack. Both of these mount options will prevent your character from entering dense terrain. A hero armed with a magic sword and mounted on a Manticore is a very effective force multiplier. Just make sure you don't roll a blunder with him. The Sorceress is your wizard character, and you can take 1 for every 1000 points. She has a good command value of 8, but adds no attacks in combat. As you are limited to 2 characters per 1000 points, you may think of your Sorceress as a commander first and a spellcaster second. The The Sorceress also has the same choice of mounts as the hero, but you can also opt to place her upon a Cauldron of Blood, provided you have at least one unit of Witch Elves in the army. The Cauldron of Blood is a chariot mount and adds 1 attack, but also gives the Sorceress a one-time bonus of +1 to cast a spell. It also provides a lovely centerpiece model for the army. Taking a Sorceress gives you access to the Dark Elf spell list, which features mainly spells to cause damage. Doombolt is the standard 5+ 30cm straight line attack, which is good for causing disruption or adding a few hits in combat. Dominion is an excellent utility spell, identical to Doom and Despair from the Tomb King's list. Black Horror is a long-range damage-dealing attack which ignores enemy armour, but is very difficult to cast. Whilst Soul Stealer is high risk, high reward, as you must commit your Sorceress to combat, but it can inflict a lot of damage upon an armoured enemy. Dark Elves are a very competitive army, and this build is the one used by my regular opponent Steve to take to tournaments, which usually sees him playing in the final. Note the extensive use of Cold One Knights. You could, however, decide upon a shooting and magic themed list, if you favour the defensive playstyle. You also have the option to build a high breakpoint, melee infantry focused army. Or you can just take one of everything and figure out the tactics as you go along. There are so many good choices in the list, it's quite hard to build a bad one. So why would you choose to play Dark Elves? Maybe you're the type of person that always roots for the bad guy in movies, and you want to bring the goody two-shoes armies down a peg or two, especially the High Elves. Dark Elves favour an aggressive playstyle, and with your Command 10 General, sending a full brigade of Cold One Knights charging into the enemy lines on turn 1 is a real possibility, and no other army has the potential to cause this much damage to the enemy before the game has even begun. Dark Elf miniatures are readily available from alternative manufacturers, if you can't find the Games Workshop originals. If you have an Icy Tundra themed board, the Dark Elf army looks very good when based in this way. Maybe you enjoy painting half-naked chicks. Or maybe you're just tired of losing. The greatest strength of the Dark Elf army is the Command 10 General, especially when combined with units of Cold One Knights. The ability to reliably launch a 60cm charge with 4 units of Cold One Knights cannot be understated, and this is why it's so critical to mitigate against the chance of rolling a double 6. So consider taking the Sceptre of Sovereignty and enough characters to avoid the General's loss of command. The Hydra and the Manticore also give you access to Terror, which throws the balance of melee combats strongly in your favour. Although the Harpies are not as good flyers as found in other armies, they still provide mobility and utility which can't be overlooked. The Boltthoras, Dark Riders and Crossbowmen allow you to put out a tremendous volume of fire, which is good for erasing lightly armoured troops. And one final thing, did I mention the Cold One Knights? The key weakness of the Dark Elf army is its lack of resilience, as no unit has more than 3 hits per stand, with the exception of the Hydra. This means the Dark Elves cannot play a war of attrition. Instead, they must pick and choose the fights they are likely to win. Dark Elf units are also expensive, which means your breakpoint is unlikely to be high, so you shouldn't be trying to trade units with the enemy. Apart from their spell list, the Dark Elves also have no access to armour-piercing attacks, so armies that have a high number of hits and decent armour saves, such as Chaos, Ogres and Dwarfs, may present a problem. And finally, the flavourful Dark Elf command rule does mean you run the risk of losing your heroes halfway through the battle. In summary, the Dark Elf army is, in my opinion, very strong, with excellent troop choices throughout. They are one of the few armies that can cause High Elf generals to quake in fear, and they definitely reward an aggressive playstyle. My advice is go in fast, go in hard, and don't roll double sixes.